Oh my goodness, it is finally happening. Despite rumors of a far-off launch at the end of November, SpaceX just confirmed that Starship's Flight 5 could be happening as soon as this weekend. And that's not all. The company also announced they're planning an epic catch of the rocket using the chopsticks. Let's get into it now on today's episode of Alpha Tech. And thanks for being here with us. So October 8th, we got the latest updates and changes from SpaceX's website. The essential schedule for Flight 5 got posted, including the countdown and detailed timeline. Now, typically, as we've seen in previous launches when SpaceX shares a schedule like that, it means they want to give space enthusiasts like us a clear view of the mission timeline right before the launch takes place shortly afterward. In the update on their website and social media platform X, SpaceX declared Starship's fifth flight test is preparing to launch as soon as October 13th, pending regulatory approval. Now, let's not get too caught up in the FAA approval part because Elon's confidence leaves little room for doubt. He stated this on X: launch could be as soon as Sunday. They're fully preparing everything for Starship's fifth flight, and October 13th can't get here soon enough. Do you believe in this timeline? Comment yes if you agree, or no if you don't, and share your reasons down there in the comments too. Now, to be honest, until the readiness is confirmed by both SpaceX and its leader, the challenge still lies in the pending regulatory approval, and the FAA is the agency that's in charge of giving that. In fact, the FAA has previously stated that the launch license would not be issued by the end of next month, causing confusion since other indicators like regulatory filings and other flight preparations suggest that SpaceX could be ready to launch as early as mid-October. The FAA's firm stance, citing safety, environmental, and licensing regs, directly contradicts the launch timeline that was hinted at by SpaceX. So, the question is now, why is SpaceX so confident in announcing this early launch date? I'm certain that they probably know something that we don't. But let's consider a few possibilities. First, SpaceX could be anticipating a change in the FAA stance, allowing for an earlier launch date than originally projected. The FAA's current statements could merely reflect the situation as it stands now, leaving room for adjustments, meaning that SpaceX addresses FAA's concerns like the sonic booms generated by the Super Heavy's return from Mechazoa's rocket-catching maneuver, which required an additional 60 days of review since September. The launch could be brought forward. Another possibility, fueling SpaceX's strong assertion about Flight 5 happening this weekend, could be NASA getting involved. As a major partner in Starship's program, especially through Artemis missions, NASA might have intervened to expedite the licensing process, potentially bypassing the FAA's usual procedures. In theory, NASA has the authority to grant launch licenses, which would explain SpaceX's optimistic outlook. A third, more concerning possibility is that SpaceX might be pushing the legal envelope with pre-launch activities without the FAA's approval. While that's just speculation, this approach could lead to a bit of a legal conflict with the FAA if SpaceX goes ahead without getting permission. However, I don't think that's very likely. SpaceX is not trying to violate any U.S. government regulations right now. It'd be like tying their own hands and surrendering to the government. Plus, if tensions between SpaceX and the FAA escalate, it could complicate future launches even more. So keeping in mind, though Elon's been quite vocal in his public support for Donald Trump and his opposition to the current government, it's highly unlikely that this would result in actions that cross legal boundaries. That's especially true with the strong leadership of Gwynne Shotwell, SpaceX's powerful and level-headed COO. Shotwell, who's very skilled in negotiations, has always backed Elon's plays in major projects and often takes charge in steering the company's direction. In a September conference before the U.S. House, Shotwell claimed that SpaceX was working with dozens of regulatory bodies to do a Starship launch, which naturally means complying with dozens, if not hundreds, of regulations. Confidently adding that she's not afraid of regulations, demonstrating her firm resolve and confidence in the operational process of Starship when addressing official concerns. For this reason, I believe SpaceX won't intentionally push beyond the limits of government regulations. Instead, they're likely to make meticulous preparations for a legit launch. We've talked about several possibilities, but in the end, there's about a 90% chance of the Starship Flight 5 launch happening as planned. I'm sure most of you share the hope that the administrative process moves quickly because we are all eager to see that shining beast take to the sky. Of course, in this scenario, we can't overlook the most exciting aspect of the Flight 5 launch, catching the Super Heavy using the chopsticks. This was confirmed by Elon himself when someone asked him whether Mechazoa would actually get used for the catch. Responding on X, he said, yes, if all systems are working well. Also, on October 8th, SpaceX carried out a double water deluge test, possibly simulating two crucial phases of the flight, one for the launch and another for the landing of the booster. The sheer amount of water unleashed was insane, further solidifying the likelihood of successfully catching Super Heavy. The flight profile has been updated with a new countdown and timeline for Starship Flight 5. With the success of Starship's fourth flight, SpaceX seems to have retained much of the original schedule. However, the timeline for Starship's actions in Flight 5 is a bit faster compared to Flight 4, possibly because the company aims to increase the success rate for the mission, with the new goal of attempting to catch the booster with Megazol. This process will happen about 6 minutes and 33 seconds after launch, when the first stage, Booster 12, reignites its engines to slow descent. After this, two possibilities arise. At 6 minutes and 50 seconds, Super Heavy lands in the ocean if SpaceX opts out of the catch attempt, or at 6 minutes and 56 seconds, if conditions are optimal, the rocket shuts down its burn and the catch will proceed. That's an incredible plan by SpaceX. With these two well-defined scenarios, there's no reason the launch would pose a risk to land-based facilities. You remember Elon's outdoor presentation earlier this year back in April? He revealed Super Heavy would be equipped with a new system capable of identifying any hazards along its descent path. If something goes wrong during the landing that makes the catch dangerous, the rocket could automatically reroute for a soft landing in the Gulf of Mexico. This is entirely feasible. Given Elon's AI company, artificial intelligence could easily handle a task like that. That said, concerns about risks are not unfounded. Musk confirmed in a comment, exactly, the catch attempt hinges on several factors. Both the booster and tower must have fully functional systems, underscoring the complexity and precision of the maneuver. Plus, the flight director must manually approve the catch, adding a layer of human decision-making. This approval must be given before the completion of the boost-back burn, highlighting the narrow timing window involved. Automated health checks are essential to this process, continuously monitoring both the booster and the tower to ensure all parameters are within safe limits for a successful catch attempt. This reliance on advanced automated systems highlights the cutting-edge tech and software integration required for such a bold recovery method. Fortunately, SpaceX has got a backup plan in case the catch doesn't happen. If conditions are unsuitable or the manual approval isn't given in time, the booster defaults to a recovery method similar to the one used during the fourth launch. SpaceX is pushing the boundaries of engineering while maintaining a safety-first mindset. This approach allows them to test cutting-edge techniques without compromising the mission's overall success or the integrity of their equipment. SpaceX's plan to catch the Starship Super Heavy booster with the launch tower's chopsticks is a groundbreaking strategy that aims to push the limits of reusables. Unlike traditional recovery methods where rockets either landed on drone ships at sea or touched down on land-based pads, this ambitious method seeks to eliminate the need for landing legs altogether. The booster will be caught mid-descent by massive mechanical arms mounted on the launch tower that will then grip the rocket and stabilize it as it returns to the launch site. If this technique is successful, it has the potential to revolutionize rocket turnaround times. By catching the booster directly at the launch site, SpaceX could reduce the time it takes to refurb and prep it for the next mission. Traditional recovery methods require rockets get transported back to the launch facility after landing, whether from remote landing zones or offshore platforms. This process can add days or even weeks to the time between launches, slowing down the goals of SpaceX's rapid reuse. The chopsticks could allow for almost immediate refurbishment, enabling the booster to get relaunched within hours or days rather than weeks. Moreover, this method could drastically reduce refurb costs. One of the most expensive aspects of rocket recovery is refurbishing the landing legs, which experience significant wear and tear during touchdown. This reduction in mechanical complexity could lead to cost savings not just in the refurbishment phase, but also in the construction of the rockets themselves. Catching the booster also minimizes exposure to the harsh sea conditions, which can cause saltwater corrosion and structural damage, further reducing the wear and tear on the rocket. This innovative approach emphasizes SpaceX's commitment to making spaceflight more cost-effective, reusable, and frequent. By lowering the costs associated with rocket recovery and reducing downtime, the company could dramatically increase its launch cadence, further cementing its position as a leader in the space industry. Despite the ongoing legal battles, Starship remains the busiest and most active spacecraft at Starbase. Notably, Super Heavy Booster 12 has undergone a series of continuous refinements, each aimed at ensuring a successful catch on the next launch. So, let's take a closer look at the advancements on Super Heavy Booster 12 and see how the company has been spending its time while waiting for the launch permit. Similarly to the relationship between Booster 7 and 8, Booster 12 is considered an upgraded, refined version of Booster 11. This similarity goes beyond design and reflects SpaceX's step-by-step development strategy. The successful flight of Booster 11 provided the company with a wealth of valuable data on booster performance. Based on this info, SpaceX implemented several improvements to Super Heavy Booster. The first new feature we need to mention is the structural changes to the vehicle. 6 new struts have been added to both the stabilization points of Booster 12, with 3 on each side of the socket where the stabilization arms lock onto the booster. Initially, it was speculated that this addition was to enhance the rigidity and stability of the structure. However, upon closer examination, they are actually the new deceleration points, intricately designed for Starship, showcasing SpaceX's groundbreaking thinking in optimizing the booster landing and recovery. During the landing phase, when Super Heavy's in a hover state, these new struts are expected to be the first point of contact with the Chopstick system, robotic arms designed to catch and stabilize the rocket. Their special position allows for a gradual and controlled deceleration process, minimizing direct friction between the rocket body and the catch arms. This improvement not only helps protect the surface of the booster, extending its lifespan, but also allows for more precise control during landing. Additionally, SpaceX has rapidly installed a number of new bumpers components on both tower arms, including 17 bumper segments. Unlike the old black pads, these look like ship steel with rubber inside and are resilient. These bumpers will create resistance to slow down any remaining velocity and align the landing. The way the new bumpers will act as brakes, I suspect, will also fill the gap between the tank and the newly installed landing struts on Booster 12. These elements will help align the catch pins, improving the chances of a successful catch and reducing the impact force between the arms and booster during the landing. Made of steel with a 45-degree angle at the top, they'll function as a guide so nothing gets stuck on blunt edges. You don't want the booster swaying between the chopsticks as they get close, so something compressible is needed to fill that gap. With the next flight, Flight Test 5 ahead of us, we're all hoping for a smooth launch and return. For SpaceX to accomplish this feat, many things need to go right. After a successful launch, the tower arms and their complex systems must remain operational. The booster itself will need to perform its mission perfectly and return in a controlled and precise trajectory. If any issues occur, the contingency plan is for the booster to crash in the ocean. At present, SpaceX engineers are focused on gathering as much data as possible. How long will it take for arms to close around a descending booster? How much force will they exert, and how much of that force can the booster withstand? These are crucial questions. As a result, during the waiting period for the FAA's permit, SpaceX is likely conducting more tests involving the hardware required for the catch task. Recently, on October 4th, alongside Booster 12, SpaceX did a stress test on the chopsticks and those bright orange bags we hadn't seen in a while. These bags are typically used to test the stress limits of big structures and equipment by simulating loads that may be too expensive or impractical to use solely for testing. The estimated load on each side is 250 tons, 3 bags on each side, 2 bags of 100 tons, and then 1 bag of 50 tons. Total load's 500 tons, about 100 tons more than the combined warehouse mass of both Starship and Super Heavy. The result of the tests are surely being evaluated by SpaceX, but it wouldn't be surprising if the chopsticks pass the test without needing further adjustments. By the time this video is released, I think they may conduct another test. Now, putting that aside, let's move on to the next feature of Super Heavy Booster 12, which concerns the engine protection system. The most notable change is the removal of the black material that previously surrounded the base of the engine shielding in earlier versions. This alteration gives the booster a new appearance, with the shiny steel rim now standing out on the protective cover. It remains unclear whether any other changes have been made to the engine protection system, suggesting SpaceX may be in the process of testing and evaluating the effectiveness of this change. Although this modification may seem small, it could hold technical implications. It may relate to improving heat dissipation, reducing weight, simplifying the manufacturing process, or even testing new materials. Another change is the redesigned Starlink terminal on Booster 12. These devices are mounted on the chines, protruding parts of the rocket body that cover the COPVs, that's composite overwrap pressure vessels. Instead of the circular dishes used previously, Booster 12 now features square dishes for Starlink terminals. This is an important step in SpaceX's ongoing design refinements. This change was not sudden. In fact, Booster 10 had already introduced this new design, but it was limited to the chines covering the CO2 tanks. Booster 12 marks a new progression by adopting this square dish design across all 4 chines, creating a unified and consistent design. The new shape of the Starlink equipment also helps optimize space on the rocket surface and may improve aerodynamics in certain flight conditions. The 4th new feature we observe with Super Heavy Booster concerns tanks and pressure control. In particular, there's a possibility that Booster 12 has been fitted with new tanks, although this has yet to be officially confirmed. The info comes from observations of Super Heavy Booster 15, where SpaceX added 9 more tanks besides the landing oxygen tank. The primary purpose of this addition appears to be increasing liquid oxygen capacity, supporting the burn phase during the booster's landing. Interestingly, a similar set of 9 tanks was spotted being transported into Mega Bay 1 while Booster 12 and Booster 15 were still inside, suggesting that aside from Booster 15, SpaceX could be installing these on another booster. It seems SpaceX is applying this improvement across multiple booster versions, not limited to just Booster 15. However, determining whether Booster 12 is equipped with these additional tanks is difficult as this change is not visible from the exterior of the vehicle. We need official confirmation from SpaceX to confirm this. But it remains an intriguing discovery for all of us. The next innovation on Booster 12 comes from the venting section. The object beside the alignment wedge has been removed. The fourth object beside the alignment wedge, its function remaining unclear, has been removed from the venting section of Booster 12. It's not known why this change was made, but it appears to be unnecessary. And finally, there's a modification to the Flight Termination System FTS on this booster. Booster 12 has been fitted with a new FTS casing on the liquid oxygen tank. The casing is positioned near the side supports for the liquid methane transfer tube and features a different design compared to the casing used on the fuel tank. Notably, this new FTS casing design also appears on the modified flight termination system of Booster 13, suggesting this is a deliberate improvement being applied across multiple boosters. While the exact reason for this change has not been disclosed, it's speculated that it aims to enhance the destructiveness of the FTS. Overall, these are the key changes we can observe in the Super Heavy Booster 12 compared to earlier versions. Every modification, no matter how small, is the result of careful learning and analysis from previous flights. In particular, the successful recovery of the rocket stages into the ocean during the fourth Starship launch gave SpaceX a wealth of valuable knowledge and data. This continuous improvement process not only brings SpaceX closer to achieving its goal of developing a fully reusable launch system, but also accelerates the pace of innovation in the whole space industry. However, this path is not without its challenges. SpaceX is facing some significant hurdles from legal and environmental regulations, which could potentially slow things down. There has to be a balance between innovation and compliance with safety and environmental regulations. Government agencies play an important role in ensuring that the development of the space industry progresses safely and responsibly. It's important for these agencies to recognize the importance of innovation and find ways to support companies like SpaceX while still upholding necessary safety and environmental standards. This will not only drive the growth of the space industry, but also bring long-term benefits to society, from advancements in communication technology to expanding our understanding of the universe. The war of words between SpaceX and the FAA continues to escalate, and we've been talking about it a lot lately. However, what most have overlooked are SpaceX's game-changing solutions that could break Starship free from the suffocating chains of the FAA. So, what are these solutions, and how is it effective with SpaceX's Starship launch? As we know, Starship launch facilities currently operate at 2 locations, Texas and Florida. However, when Starship enters regular service, only one location will be likely selected as the primary base for Starship launches, while the other mainly serves as a testing ground for rocket components. Given what we've seen over the last year, the growth of Starbase facility in Texas is indisputable. Land areas have expanded, test facilities like Massey have gotten upgrades, offices in the Star Factory are getting built, and even a second launch tower at Starbase is being developed at a rapid pace. Additionally, the strong relationship between Texas leadership and SpaceX has grown closer, with both working together to boost the region's economy. Prime example is Congressman Troy E. Nehls, a Texas rep, who recently wrote to the FAA urging the agency to quickly allow Starship flights, even as the FAA increased pressure with environmental accusations to hinder SpaceX's progress. Now, looking at these developments, we see a shift in SpaceX's approach. Just 2 years back, Elon mentioned potentially moving Starship's ops to Kennedy Space Center in Florida. But now the expansion in Texas seems to be contradicting that earlier statement. However, while Starbase may seem to be developing smoothly as it sits in a land of vast potential, concerns about environmental impact have led local environmental groups to closely watch SpaceX. This scrutiny has made the goal of turning Starbase into the gateway to Mars a bit more difficult than before. The ongoing clash between SpaceX, Elon, and the FAA has been intense with no signs of compromise. And as we know, SpaceX is not known for its patience. Recall back in 2022, during a public event, Elon warned that FAA delays could force Starship flights to happen outside of Texas. "We do have the alternative of the Cape," Musk told the crowd, referring to Kennedy Space Center. "We actually applied for environmental approval for launching from the Cape a few years ago, and we got it." To be honest, the delays caused by FAA are something that SpaceX could tolerate. But the fact that they're being slow because of unnecessary environmental reviews, issuing even false reports due to half-hearted investigations, or putting overly high demands on a product that's still in development like Starship, this is something that none of us, not even us regular Joes, can accept from the government agency, right? Hey, if you feel that way, please type a yes down there in the comments. That being said, if the excessive obstruction by our environmental agency continues, the development of Starship, planned to fully explode by next decade, could get delayed by another 10 years. We have to ask, what can SpaceX do to save this situation? We do not discuss the potential political factors that might affect how these space agencies are managed, such as Donald Trump getting reelected as president and Elon being handed a big position as promised. Instead, we're going to talk about the proactive solutions that SpaceX could implement to facilitate the upgrades to the Starship program, no matter how closely FAA monitors. First of all, a familiar option for SpaceX is to do more Starship launches in Florida. As we can see, the FAA still oversees SpaceX's launches in Florida, such as the 2 Falcon 9 issues back in July when the FAA stopped all subsequent launches to investigate. However, the suspension period for launches isn't too long, besides the fact SpaceX quickly identified the root cause of the issue. The regular Falcon 9 launches from the launch complex SpaceX has leased from NASA also play a role in speeding up the FAA's investigation process, allowing SpaceX to resume their flights sooner. With the backing of NASA, if Starship were moved to Florida and started executing launches for NASA's missions there, dealing with the FAA would certainly be smoother, to say the least. SpaceX has already considered this option, but it wasn't until earlier this year that they started accelerating work at this site. SpaceX had planned to build 2 more launch towers in Florida, and earlier this year, we got significant news SpaceX had applied for permission to launch 120 Starship missions in Florida. That's 44 launches annually from Kennedy Space Center and 76 at SL-37, Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. But moving to Florida does have its own problems, including rivalry from the competition. If you grow too fast and get global recognition, it's easy to get haters because they think that you've stolen their spotlight, and that's true for SpaceX too. In Florida, 2 long-standing rivals, Blue Origin and ULA, have filed objections to SpaceX's launch application, requesting that SpaceX cut their number of launches and compensate for potential damages that Starship launches might cause. Well, that's pretty shady, but for companies like Blue Origin and ULA, at least they're managing to slow SpaceX down a bit. Besides launching Starship in Florida, SpaceX could also explore launching at sea. One of the primary advantages lies in the realm of safety, where impact on both people and infrastructure is minimized. Launching powerful rockets in the middle of the ocean reduces the risks associated with unexpected incidents. The vast expanse of the ocean gives a buffer zone, shielding populated areas from dangers and ensuring the safety of both the launch ops and surrounding communities. Beyond just safety, environmental benefits of an ocean launch platform are pretty significant. Launching from the ocean mitigates or eliminates several factors that can adversely affect the environment and ecosystems. The absence of factors like sound, dust, smoke, debris that are inherent in land-based options contributes to a cleaner and less disruptive launch process. This not only protects the delicate balance of ecosystems, but also minimizes the ecological footprint associated with space exploration activities. Not only is SpaceX aiming for this, but lately there have been several companies in the same field that have seen the same potential of sea launch platforms. Tom Marotta, founder and CEO of Spaceport, talked about this during a panel at the Spacecom conference last year. "What we're really doing is building a new type of spaceport," he said. "We're building a high-cadence, responsive spaceport to solve the problem of spaceport congestion." Growing activity at Cape Canaveral is threatening to cause problems for launch companies as the pace of activity stresses infrastructure there. "It's scalable," Marotta said of the sea-based approach. "It's a lot easier to build more ships to meet more launch demand than it is to go find 100 acres off the coast somewhere." Unlike ground-based commercial sites, spaceport companies' sea-based platforms do not need FAA spaceport license known as Part 420. It comes down to how we define a spaceport, which is a fixed location on Earth. And his move, said Pam Underwood, director of FAA's Office of Spaceports. Well, considering the current developments of Starship and the FAA, should SpaceX immediately opt for an offshore launch platform to do their Starship launches? That could be a great intention down the road. The final option for SpaceX to escape the grips of the FAA, as many of you have commented on in our recent videos, is that SpaceX could launch Starship from a country outside the U.S. But the thing is, SpaceX can't relocate away from the states because of the ITARS regulation that would prohibit them from exporting their rocket technology. Back in the 60s, the US alone had the technology to adjust the thrust of a rocket. For the rockets, if your guidance system could adjust the thrust, then you'd have much greater control over accuracy. Issues like that were at the forefront of concern during the Cold War years, and the technology to prevent that technology from falling into the wrong hands was significant. Starship's platform has largely discussed in public media and presented on numerous occasions. It has some powerful rocket motors it uses in large quantities, and it almost certainly has the technology that could fall into ITAR's jurisdiction. And the same goes for the remaining debris of B-11, including a third of the Super Heavy engine. This is one part we don't want to fall into the hands of unauthorized individuals who could analyze and study it. This is for SpaceX to salvage B-11. But what about B-10? Why didn't SpaceX recover that one? The reason lies in the depth of the locations where B-11 and B-10 fell. B-11 fell at a depth of about 61 meters underwater in shallow and easily accessible waters. B-11 is likely to spread within a radius of about 200 meters, making the search and recovery relatively easy. Once a part's found, finding the rest of the pieces can happen pretty quickly. In contrast, B-10 fell at a depth of 800 meters in deep water, beyond the reach of most conventional diving equipment. The depth's over 500 meters beyond the usual limits of standard diving tools. Debris field of B-10's likely spread over a much bigger radius, and recovering B-10 is a bit more challenging and needs some specialized equipment. To locate B-10's debris, a thorough scan and mapping of the seabed would need to be conducted. After all, we can see that it's not easy for Starship to launch outside the U.S., and launching in Florida or even at sea would still be a favorable option to avoid the pesky grip of the FAA. However, what would be even better is that if the FAA and some of these other environmental agencies just actively improve themselves to create better working conditions for SpaceX's development. This would represent truly sustainable progress through cooperation between government agencies and private organizations. After all, we're all on the same team, right? Up until today, none of us have gotten any response from FAA Administrator Mike Whitaker following the letter sent to him by Representative Kevin Kiley. The FAA's silence seems almost like an acknowledgement of their own actions. He has now, 1, pointlessly grounded a SpaceX launch that benefits America and all humanity, 2, given false testimony about it to Congress, and 3, refused to explain his false statements, tweeted California Representative Kevin Kiley. From this event, combined with SpaceX's recent bold actions with Starship, like installing the FTS system on the rocket and doing key tests with the water deluge system and Chopsticks, there is no longer any reason to deny that SpaceX is ready to rock with Starship Flight 5 this weekend, just like they announced. Now, of course, the attempt to catch the booster will be a major highlight of the launch. This is a new objective and key to SpaceX's future reusability capabilities. Now, in this video, we're going to spend most of the time talking about how SpaceX plans to execute this awesome feat. To catch Super Heavy booster as it slows down, the rocket will approach the tower, enter the gap between the extended arms, hover in place as the arms close around it, and finally come to rest on the hard points that appear to provide a surface area roughly equivalent to that of a coffee table. Although this whole thing will only take a couple seconds, according to SpaceX's timeline, there are still details that SpaceX can't overlook during the landing. This is the first of these, is the issue of the booster's mass. Mass is a disadvantage that Starship has compared to previous vehicles. The empty mass of Starship is 200 tons with the booster and 100 tons with Starship, respectively. During landing, their real mass will probably be a bit larger than the empty mass because it still contains some fuel to serve the vehicle's deceleration. But compared to other vehicles like Falcon 9 and Heavy, this mass is still much larger. Specifically, the mass of each booster Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy will reach somewhere between 22 and 25 tons, which is just a quarter of Starship and an eighth of Super Heavy. Obviously, it's going to be a challenge for the Mechazoid to catch or hold such a massive object. Also, the thrust and pressure of the engines during Super Heavy's deceleration are critical factors needed to be considered. Each Raptor 2 engine on Starship generates 2.3 meganewtons of thrust. This is much greater than the 845 kilonewton thrust produced by the Merlin 1D engine used in Falcon 9 and Heavy. Although only 3 engines are active during landing, the slightest error in thrust or pressure could affect the whole catching process, potentially making the rocket drift off center. For example, if one of the 3 engines has a malfunction, maybe it shuts down, gives less thrust, it could significantly affect the rocket's descent speed. A big and heavy object like the Super Heavy is inevitably going to fall quicker, even after decelerating. When operating in the Earth's atmosphere, we must not underestimate the effects of gravity. Worst case scenario, if the engines malfunction and fail to decelerate the booster properly, it would be a catastrophe. At that point, we'd be faced with a massive metal object weighing somewhere up to 200 tons falling out of the sky, and our task would be to catch it by hand. Impossible. Aside from Mechazell, certainly no other structure or system can accomplish that. The falling metal block would not only destroy any structures in its landing zone, but would also contain flammable materials that could ignite, causing a major explosion and spreading mass destruction. Another critical phase of the catch is the hover of Super Heavy, in coordination with the synchronized movements of the chopstick arms. This setup seems to be the perfect answer to the question of landing within the narrow constraints of Starship. We can compare it to Falcon 9, the workhorse that can land in a relatively small circle, even on an unmanned ship floating out there in the ocean. When Falcon lands on the ground, it almost always hits the bullseye on the landing pad. Falcon can only steer with grid fins, lacks gimbaled engines, and does not have the ability to hover very gracefully. Taking a look at Blue Origin's New Shepard, it can do some very slow ground landings with controlled descent using fins and gliding, but it still lacks gimbaled engine control. With all the advanced tech on Starship, the combination of grid fins, the gimbal engine, and the ability to hold in midair will likely allow it to hover. So, why did Elon and SpaceX choose to capture Starship with the chopsticks? First, weight reduction. One advantage to catching Starship is the potential for weight reduction. Every pound spared on the rocket translates directly to increased payload capacity for orbital missions. Weight's critical when designing rockets, prompting companies like SpaceX to prioritize weight saving. When considering the possibility of catching Super Heavy midair, the necessity for landing legs becomes obsolete. And given the massive size of Super Heavy, the landing legs required to support its weight would be substantial. If SpaceX can implement the midair catching for Super Heavy and then transport it to launch pad without relying on landing legs, it eliminates the need for them. And by doing so, the booster can then allocate the saved weight towards carrying even more cargo into orbit and beyond. Now, the second here is launch speed. Another unique aspect of Starship is its pursuit of rapid reusability. SpaceX aims not just for a reusable rocket, but one that can be quickly redeployed. The ultimate objective is to have Starship land, undergo minimal checks, and then be right ready for liftoff again in a short time frame. If SpaceX implements mid-air catching for Super Heavy and Starship, this process will be accelerated. For instance, if the booster were to land near the launch pad, traditional methods needing cranes and manual relocation are going to be time-consuming and could possibly delay the next launch. However, by catching Super Heavy, SpaceX can swiftly position the booster on the launch mount, expediting the whole process. Lastly, addressing Starship's vulnerability, Elon frequently emphasizes the importance of simplifying complex projects. Specifically, when asked about Starship and its plans, he said that the best part is no part. For instance, Super Heavy's grid fins were initially designed to fold akin to Falcon 9's fins. However, SpaceX opted for fixed grid fins to streamline the design and reduce complexity. Similarly, the decision to eliminate Super Heavy's landing legs follows this principle. These legs not only add weight, but pose a significant challenge in efficiently supporting the massive booster when it lands. Looking back at SpaceX's efforts to catch Super Heavy, it involves a lot of risks, but holds immense potential for the future. And it could also be the key to unlocking a new era of progress for the space industry as a whole. As of now, SpaceX teams in Texas are fully prepared for this. Over the last few months, they've been reinforcing the launch tower and chopsticks, working around the clock to add additional reinforcements and test the load-bearing capacity of the arms. Extensive upgrades ahead of this flight test have been made to hardware and software across Super Heavy, Starship, and the launch and catch tower infrastructure at Starbase, SpaceX said. SpaceX engineers have spent years preparing and months testing for the booster catch attempt, with technicians pouring tens of thousands of hours into building the infrastructure to maximize chances of success. It will take about 7 minutes for the Super Heavy booster to reach the edge of space, separate from the upper stage of Starship, and then return to Starbase for recovery. While the booster heads back to Earth, Starship ignites its 6 engines to accelerate close to orbital speed, fast enough to complete half an orbit of Earth before gravity pulls it back toward the atmosphere over the Indian Ocean. After analyzing the results from June's mission, SpaceX engineers decided to redesign the heat shield for the next Starship. The company noted their technicians spent over 12,000 hours replacing the thermal protection system with new generation tiles, a backup coating, and other production layers between the ship's flap structures. Starship will not attempt to reignite its Raptor engines in space during this upcoming test flight. This is one of the next objectives SpaceX needs to prove in order for Starship to achieve a stable orbit around the Earth and control re-entry, ensuring it doesn't get stuck up there in space or crash into a populous area. SpaceX planned to relight Raptor engines during the third Starship test flight, but ended up canceling that maneuver. Once Starship can maintain flight in low Earth orbit, SpaceX can start testing in-space refueling. That's a crucial step for supporting future Starship missions to the Moon, Mars, and other deep space destinations. Starship's a cornerstone of SpaceX's vision to establish a settlement on the Red Planet. NASA has a contract with SpaceX to develop a crewed Starship spacecraft for landing astronauts on the Moon as part of the Artemis program. NASA's timeline calls for the first crew landing for Artemis in 2026, but the landing could likely happen later in the decade, as both Starship's lunar lander and the new lunar spacesuits may not be ready. The spacecraft will likely fly dozens, if not more, missions before NASA approves astronaut landings on the Moon. These flights will test the rocket's ability to fly reliably to space and back, transfer cryogenic fuel in orbit, and land safely on the Moon's surface without a crew. As we've seen with SpaceX's Falcon 9, rapid reuse of launch vehicle components can enable lightning-fast launch rates, proving the architecture to recover the Super Heavy booster directly onto the launch pad, as SpaceX intends to do fairly soon, a major step on this path.
We are not afraid of regulation.
This was the bold statement made by Gwynne Shotwell, the woman leading the world's largest aerospace company when facing U.S. House officials, demonstrating her determination to seek justice for SpaceX in response to accusations of environmental regulation violations from government officials, specifically the FAA. How did Gwynne Shotwell expose the bureaucratic entanglements surrounding the FAA Starship launch license? As the president and COO of SpaceX, Gwynne holds one of the most pivotal positions in the company, overseeing its day-to-day ops and ensuring the ambitious goals are met with precision and efficiency. Her responsibilities are vast, spanning across production, sales, mission management, customer relations, and finance. In essence, she manages the entirety of SpaceX's operational framework, ensuring all aspects of the company, from rocket launches to strategic partnerships, run smoothly and effectively. Shotwell's leadership is often credited with transforming Elon's visionary ideas into tangible operational successes. Whether it's managing the complexities of launching rockets or negotiating high-stakes contracts with organizations like NASA, her strategic decision-making has been instrumental in SpaceX's rapid growth and dominance in the aerospace industry. She navigates both technical challenges and financial constraints with equal expertise, ensuring that the company remains both innovative and sustainable. Under her stewardship, SpaceX has not only grown into a major player in space exploration, but has also redefined the way business is done in the industry, making Shotwell a key driver behind its continued success. But while Shotwell's efforts previously took place quietly behind the scenes at SpaceX, we've recently seen her assertive decisiveness as legal tensions between SpaceX and government regulatory agencies have escalated. She's spoken out to defend SpaceX and their space programs against unfounded accusations. During a congressional hearing, Shotwell expressed her deep love for Texas, where SpaceX is building its massive rocket empire named Starbase.
Texas, which I call my home office now. Since then, we've established state-of-the-art facilities, development, test, and launch facilities. We've improved both in McGregor, and we've developed these facilities down in Starbase at Boca Chica, Texas.
Shotwell also emphasized the importance of SpaceX's missions and the company's work in Texas, all which aim to advance humanity to new heights.
We are paving the way for humanity to be truly spacefaring and a multiplanetary species. I know that might sound crazy. It sounded crazy to me when I joined the company over 20 years ago, but I really am committed to this.
However, Shotwell expressed concerns that government bureaucracy is hindering progress, especially as SpaceX strives to continue launching its massive Starship from South Texas, expand its Starlink internet operations in Bastrop, and ensure engine testing at the McGregor site.
Sure, we want to continue to enhance regulatory efficiency so that regulation does not hold back technology and innovation. This is not an issue for our competitors overseas. It is an issue in the United States. Less so in Texas.
Specifically, with Starship, Shotwell tactfully pointed out the delays in the FAA's approval process.
We can build a rocket and get it prepared for launch faster than we can get the bureaucracy to approve us to launch.
On top of that, SpaceX president emphasized the company's cooperation with various agencies to achieve Starship's launch and reassured that the company's always complied with the law and worked diligently to protect the public. The FAA's previous environmental allegations are complete nonsense. Ultimately, only by addressing these concerns can businesses thrive. As Shotwell stated, you'll probably enhance the regulatory environment, and there's just a lot of caution that you really want to make sure that regulation does not impede progress. Later on in the hearing, Gwynn brought up a previous incident where SpaceX was fined by the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, we'll call them TCEQ for short, for operating their launch pad flood system without following the mandatory permitting process. This violation contributed to federal delays in approving the next Starship launch and stalled negotiations for the company's plan to launch and land spacecraft up to 25 times a year at Starbase. Along with federal penalties for violating the Clean Water Act at Starbase in South Texas and safety breaches during Florida launches, SpaceX has been fined a total of $785,000 in recent weeks. At Starbase, state and federal regulators fined the company for its high-pressure water deluge system, which sprays more than 100,000 gallons of water to reduce force, heat, and noise from the Starship engine during launch. Shotwell maintained that the system, which she said resembles an upside-down showerhead, was licensed and permitted by TCEQ. EPA, however, came in afterward and didn't like the license or the permit that we had for that and wanted to turn it into a federal permit, which we're working on right now. TCEQ fined the company for operating the system without proper permits and has not yet confirmed a new one for SpaceX. However, following Shotwell's testimony at the hearing, the legal situation for SpaceX appeared to improve significantly, illustrating the exceptional negotiation skills of the woman who's long stood behind billionaire Elon Musk. TCEQ said that SpaceX could use the launch pad water deluge system within the constraints of the enforcement order, even though the order is not yet finalized. SpaceX can currently use its deluge system if the provisions of the agreed order are complied with, the TCEQ spokesman said. The order requires SpaceX to monitor wastewater, which must stay within certain parameters, also requiring SpaceX to continue the process for the proper permit to operate the deluge system, which can take a year or more. The TCEQ enforcement order is still in the public comment phase and won't officially be in effect until it appears before TCEQ commissioners, who don't meet again until October 25th. The EPA's enforcement order is open for public comment till October 21st. So, is the deluge system safe for the environment? The deluge system, like a giant upside-down shower nozzle, sprays more than 100,000 gallons of chlorinated fresh water skyward during launches and tests. While much of it is captured in retention ponds or vaporized by the heat and combustion, EPA found each use of the system discharged between 34 and 45,000 gallons directly into the wetlands surrounding the launch site. Starship uses liquid methane and oxygen for fuel, burning cleaner than other more toxic rocket fuel. However, the deluge water is still considered industrial wastewater because it's exposed to heat and combustion. Fish and Wildlife Services estimated that during each launch, the system discharges 71,000 gallons of chlorinated water and as much as 190 pounds of metals like chromium, nickel, and iron from ablation of the launch pad infrastructure. Fish and Wildlife, in its environmental consultation with the FAA, determined that there were likely adverse effects of operating the deluge and detonation suppression system. The FAA stated that they received confirmation from TCEQ August 23rd and then from the EPA September 12th that they all consider SpaceX to be in compliance with environmental laws, acknowledging that the companies initiated the process from a Texas Pollution Discharge Elimination System permit, paid the civil fines, and agreed to comply with monitoring and reporting requirements. So, what does all that mean? At this point, we know that the companies resolved the environmental issues, leaving only that FAA permit, which is pending an investigation into changes in the Starship launch record. While awaiting the FAA's decision, SpaceX has continued to do tests and modifications on Super Heavy Booster 12 and Ship 30, all aimed at achieving the ability to catch the booster with the chopstick arms. However, unlike some traditional aerospace orgs that operate under cost-plus contracts where delays and cost overruns are common, new space companies like SpaceX are highly wary of bureaucracies. These regulations are often seen as barriers to growth and innovation. Elon recently expressed this frustration on X, saying, "America's being smothered by even larger mountains of irrational regulations from ever more new agencies that serve no purpose apart from the aggrandizement of bureaucrats." As a leader in commercial spaceflight revolution, SpaceX is working at a breakneck pace, becoming the most active launch provider in the world. The company's not only launching astronauts, satellites, and cargo, but is also pushing the envelope of space exploration with the ultimate goal of getting to other planets. SpaceX has poured enormous resources into its flagship project, the Starship, and each test flight has achieved major milestones. testing the limits of the system and proving to everyone its reliability. The fifth Starship flight test is poised to take things a step further with an ambitious attempt to return the Super Heavy booster to the launch site and then catch it in midair, a feat unprecedented in the history of spaceflight. This mission is a big stepping stone for NASA's Artemis program that aims to take astronauts back to the moon. NASA's chosen Starship is the human-rated lunar lander for this Artemis mission, which will bring astronauts to the moon's south pole for the very first time. So for this reason, it is quite crucial that Starship is fully operational ASAP. These early test flights are vital in demonstrating the rocket's reliability and testing advanced technologies, like in-space refueling, which are necessary for the Artemis lunar landings. On a broader scale, there's also the international race to consider. China plans to land their astronauts on the moon by 2030, and NASA's admin Bill Nelson has made it clear that U.S. astronauts need to be the first to return. Kevin Coleman, FAA's Associate Administrator for Space Transportation, recently echoed this sentiment in a discussion with lawmakers, emphasizing the importance to get back to the moon before China and reaffirmed the FAA's commitment to supporting the nation's space industry. However, the current regulatory framework is directly delaying Starship test flights, which could undermine U.S. national interests. It's clear that agencies like the FAA need to ensure that their regulations align with the government's national security and foreign policy priorities. Launching Starship from Starbase is what everyone expects, but it's not easy with the FAA still in the way. It's tough to remove this barrier quickly, but development demands SpaceX launch faster. Is there a way to avoid that? How about moving to a location without the FAA interfering, like offshore? That sounds pretty promising. So, how would an offshore spaceport be better for Starship? SpaceX has already considered launching Starship from the sea. They even started working on it before. SpaceX's purchase of oil rigs was revealed in Jan of 2021. The deck of Phobos was halfway cleared during intermittent work. Unfortunately, in early last year, CEO Gwynne Shotwell announced SpaceX had temporarily shelved plans for a floating Starship launch platform to focus on entirely gaining more flight experience with a next-generation rocket. However, she remained confident that offshore platforms would become a valuable asset in the future. After experiencing Starship launches and the environmental regulations that SpaceX has to circumnavigate with every land-based launch, we can see the complexities of launching rockets on land under these regulations. Now, we may criticize the FAA and other environmental agencies for their slow and somewhat inaccurate processes. So how long is it going to take them to change all that? Adjusting regs is not something that happens overnight, and creating a workforce with a high level of expertise takes a bit longer than just a month or two. If we're waiting for a regulatory shift from Congress, it could be a long time before SpaceX finds launching rockets easier. So, right now could be the perfect time for SpaceX and their leaders, like Elon and Gwynne Shotwell, to seriously consider launching Starship offshore. So, why is there a need to launch from an offshore platform instead of using good old solid land? Elon also said that launches and landings had to be far enough away so as not to bother heavily populated areas. The company's plan to eventually carry out to 3 launches and landings a day would certainly necessitate putting some serious distance between the launch site and people. Most of us could only handle about 1 sonic boom a month, if that, and this is one of the reasons the FAA is used to delay Starship despite SpaceX providing publicly credible evidence. Besides, a wide no-fly zone and road closures go into effect in launch days. And if Starships do eventually shuttle people around Earth or beyond on a daily basis, the takeoff and landing points would need to be conveniently located. Going a few miles offshore is likely better in this regard than finding a huge empty swath of land in, say, somewhere like New Mexico or Nevada. Rather than building launch pads from scratch, it's possible SpaceX would refurb existing oil rigs. The bigger rigs are about the size of 2 football fields, and there's plenty of them in the Gulf of Mexico, though only a couple very near Brownsville. There's something inherently appealing about a plan of converting oil rigs, symbols of an industry doomed to decline, into bustling spaceports, which evoke visions of a futuristic era of easy space travel to the moon or Mars. But how feasible is SpaceX's goal of offshore launch pads, and how might they get it done? Turns out the idea of spinning offshore rigs into spaceports is not a new development. From the 60s all the way to the 1980s, the Luigi Broglio Space Center launched payloads into space from a converted oil platform off Kenya's coast. The multinational company Sea Launch converted the mobile drilling rig Odyssey into a launch platform back in '97. Dozens of rockets have blasted payload to space from Odyssey, along with a couple failed launches. Florida's DOC considered creating floating spaceports on offshore rigs in 1989, but ultimately decided the approach was too costly in the short run. In 96, a study published in the IEE Spectrum recommended Russia marry its agile Soviet rocket design with the best oil platform tech, and that may provide an altogether new means of getting big satellites into orbit. Recently, China has achieved milestones in developing and deploying sea-based rocket launch platforms, a crucial step, especially for a country with a pretty narrow coastline and situated far from the equator. Launching rockets from land in China poses risks to populated areas, prompting domestic companies to swiftly develop offshore solutions. China's Series 1 solid-fueled rocket developed by Galactic Energy became the first rocket launched from the sea in September last year. To date, it's done 3 sea launches, making it the only flexible rocket in China capable of launching from both land and sea. Earlier this year, another rocket with a somewhat comically short appearance named Gravity 1, made by the Chinese company Arianespace, lifted off from a ship deck that was anchored at sea. At the end of September, another Chinese rocket, this time Smart Dragon 3, got launched from a floating platform off the east coast of China. All launches successfully sent Chinese sats into orbit, demonstrating the nation's capability and flexibility in space tech development. With these advancements in China, it's clear launching rockets from the sea is entirely feasible, raising the question of whether similar technologies could be adopted by companies like SpaceX. But what makes this particularly interesting is the massive scale of their rockets. Alla Pozdovka, a professor at the Scandinavian Institute of Maritime Law, extensively researched sea-based launch facilities and their legal and technological implications. What is really new in SpaceX projects, she said in an email, is that all other projects launch small sats into orbit and some suborbital projects. Meanwhile, SpaceX is trying to eventually launch missions to the Moon, Mars, and into hypersonic orbits around the Earth, some of which would carry humans, which is quite different from earlier projects, Alla noted. Obviously, launching on the water can provide strategic advantages to include minimizing safety risks, air traffic interference, limiting noise and nuisance to surrounding communities, etc., according to Sarah Langston, assistant professor of space flight ops at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, in an email. Alla pointed out that mobile oil rigs can also easily move to new locations tailored to the needs of space missions. She cautioned that she wasn't an expert in how to convert offshore oil platforms to spaceports, but said that oil rigs already possess characteristics that are necessary for launches out at sea. They may float or even self-propelled or built to be stable on water, Alla said. However, they must have a system that allows stabilizing the platform for the launch. They'd need to have some support vessels, I would presume, to ensure initiating and control of the launch. Someone needs to push the button, and it can't be done in the immediate proximity to the launch rig. Because SpaceX vehicles are partially reusable, these spaceports might also accommodate landings, which could add another layer of complexity to the company's plans to retrofit the rigs. And this aligns with SpaceX's long-term goals. Perhaps even exceeding CEO Elon's infamously lofty ambitions, Gwynne said that SpaceX has designed Starship to be as much like aircraft ops as we possibly can get, in the hopes of allowing dozens of launches, if not hundreds of launches a day. Now, no rocket family in history has launched more than 61 times in a year, making Gwynne's Starship cadence target hundreds or even thousands of times more ambitious than a 1980s rocket record that is still standing 40 years later. Dozens to hundreds of Starship launches a day would be 2 or 3 orders of magnitude beyond the highest cadences the FAA ever allowed. Gwynne's continued interest in floating platforms is thus unsurprising, as they may only be the way that SpaceX can realistically hit those airline-like Starship ops while still coexisting with U.S. regulators. In essence, SpaceX made huge gambles on the assumption that a version of Starship, mostly resembling what the company's building today, is going to be successful, reusable, and reliable. Now, SpaceX has done 4 test flights of Starship, each making progress, demonstrating the company's iterative development method is being effective. Elon's fail-fast, learn-fast approach seems to be doing quite well with this ambitious project. Unfortunately, regulatory barriers, thank you FAA, particularly environmental ones, appear to be slowing things down. Of course, SpaceX isn't going to let that happen without a fight. Discussions have erupted, and efforts must continue to intensify as they find ways to maintain the development speed of Starship. Gwynne Shotwell's clear desire is to do more orbital Starship launches and gradually gather data, leading to major design changes and optimization. However, if necessary, SpaceX may need to make those adjustments now. The development of Starship is pushing the entire space industry to innovate. Other companies are having to reconsider their strategies to compete with the large payload capacity and ultimately low costs that Starship promises to offer. If SpaceX can overcome the current challenges and bring Starship into commercial operation, it could usher in a new era of space exploration. The fully reusable design and low launch costs could revolutionize how we approach space missions, from commercial satellites to, Mars exploration. So NASA's Artemis program is teetering on the brink of disaster. Don't mistake this for just a routine delay. This is a serious setback for NASA, where once bold promises have now become hollow echoes. The delays persist, and time waits for no one. The reality is, this ambitious program has already swallowed up half a previous decade. Now, there's one potential solution to untangle all this mess with NASA: SpaceX's massive multi-purpose Starship. However, even Starship's currently stuck in delays due to the FAA issues, with the possibility of further setbacks down the line. So, what has NASA got to do with Starship to salvage its costly program? How are future governments going to handle the FAA's space regulations now to ensure rapid development of their space industry? So, despite receiving full support from Congress and the space community, NASA's Artemis program still faces some troubling uncertainties. The first crewed flight aboard Orion, an endeavor that's been in development for 20 years now, remains uncertain due to concerns about its heat shield. The SLS rocket is also facing issues with its core stage, and unless this gets fixed, NASA's financial situation is only going to get worse. Since 2020, the program has eaten up $20 billion, bringing total cost to over $100 billion. The program is currently burning through $12 million every single day. Moreover, there's no reliable timeline for the first moon landing. Officially, NASA wants to send Artemis 3 to the moon in September of 26, but unofficially, the reality paints a far less optimistic picture. Alongside the issues with the SLS, the heat shield of Orion still needs to get fixed, and spacesuits from Axiom Space might not yet be ready. A more realistic date for landing might be 2028, maybe even later. And the challenges don't stop there. After Artemis 3, the roadmap gets even more complex. Artemis 4 is set to launch a larger version of NASA's SLS rocket, involve a new launch tower, make a stop at the Lunar Gateway, a space station near the moon. And yet, as this unfolds, China is rapidly advancing with a goal of getting 2 astronauts on the moon by 2030, achieving a geopolitical win over the U.S. by beating them in the race to return to the moon. A flat or shrinking NASA budget will only worsen these issues, and the agency is unlikely to get a significant funding boost soon. The core issue with Artemis is that NASA is attempting to do too much with deep space exploration with insufficient resources. Evidence of this has already surfaced, with NASA undermining their own science program, including significant cuts to the Chandra Space Telescope and the cancellation of Viper to cover Artemis's soaring costs. If NASA continues down this road like a frog in boiling water, the Artemis program is at serious risk of failing. But wait, hold on. Do you feel like something's missing? Yes, it's the Starship lander. And now we'll delve deeper into that. In reality, a Starship lander is just one piece of NASA's entire process for getting to the moon. But to be honest, once Starship can reach and orbit the moon, there's no reason it couldn't directly take astronauts and their cargo to the moon without the expensive and technically troubled rocket components or spacecraft that are eating up 97% of NASA and Boeing's budget. We're even more concerned for the future now that Boeing failed their Starliner mission, leaving 2 astronauts stranded on the ISS. It's safe to say that Starship's currently playing a massive role in NASA's lunar program, and more broadly, that all of SpaceX is carrying the weight of the U.S. aerospace industry on their shoulders. Let's face it, without SpaceX, we'd still be relying on Russia's unreliable Soyuz launches to the space station, even as Russia continues what they're doing in Ukraine. Without SpaceX, neither the U.S. nor Europe would have reliable access to space, and without SpaceX, Artemis program doesn't stand a chance of succeeding. This puts critical strategic goals at severe risk, like winning the crucial geopolitical race against China, Russia, and their abilities to get to the moon this century and maintaining a long-term sustainable lunar program for their country. But unfortunately, Starship is delayed, and this has made the planned timeline for Artemis 3 unclear. The reason is well known, primarily the constraints imposed by environmental government agencies. SpaceX's colossal Starship is the biggest one in the world, with capabilities unmatched by any space vehicle that's ever made it into space. Elon, at the Wall Street Journal CEO Council, said Starship is hard project. This is a profound revolution in access to orbit. There's never been a fully reusable launch vehicle. This is the holy grail of technology, said Elon. But is there any project in SpaceX's history that hasn't been difficult? That's how the whole company operates. In fact, that's how all of Elon's companies operate. Tackling incredibly difficult challenges is the very definition of innovation. And because of this innovation, just a few years ago, NASA picked Starship's lander to take astronauts to the surface of the moon. And because of that same innovation, SpaceX has faced countless legal battles and regulatory hurdles during Starship's development, imposed by various government agencies with environmental regulations. Now, I'm not saying environmental protection is not necessary, but the way the government is handling it right now is overtly restrictive, leading to unnecessary and these time-wasting investigations. SpaceX has got to launch Starship more frequently for its development. It needs to operate consistently to carry out the mission of getting humans to the moon. And now, in the final months of this year, SpaceX is fighting to launch Starship Flight 5 sooner, but it seems like government agencies have rejected the company's very valid concerns. After all, Artemis 3 in 2026 seems like a long shot. Now is NASA's turn to act. If they want to save Artemis, they need to make some serious upgrades. Steering complex space programs requires a delicate balance between technical expertise and legislative oversight. NASA, with its highly specialized mission, faces the challenges of effectively communicating its priorities and needs to Congress. NASA's leadership needs to speak out in support of missions that align with the nation's essential space goals, like SpaceX's Starship, instead of being quiet like they have been. Soon, the U.S. is going to have a new president. Although spaceflight is probably not at the forefront of every American's minds, the country's new leader will certainly have a fresh perspective on national space policy. Frankly, I think we're going to see many changes if it's going to be Donald Trump, as he and Elon share several common views on creating a new era in the space race. And for this reason, Elon has consistently supported Trump, criticized the current government, and eventually become a target for FAA sanctions. Elon openly declared America's being smothered by a legion of regulators that are often inept and politically driven. And the question arises, is it because of punishing Elon that the government agency FAA targets SpaceX, that's one of his companies? But if the FAA is going after SpaceX solely for this reason, that's a bad idea. Although Elon's widely recognized as the founder and driving force behind SpaceX, it's important to acknowledge that the company's not solely owned by him. Elon himself has stated that he only owns about 40% of SpaceX. The rest is across various institutional investors and original team members, including notable stakeholders like Alphabet, Google's parent company, that has 7.5% of the company. Therefore, any action that hinders SpaceX's progress would be in violation of the law, unfairly punishing legitimate interests of other shareholders that aren't Elon. Moreover, while Elon's ownership is significant, it's crucial to recognize that SpaceX is a collaboration involving numerous talented engineers and execs that contribute to the company's success. When Elon founded the company back in 2002, he did so with the participation of professional engineers and early employees like Tom Mueller, who did rocket development, and Gwynne Shotwell, who went on to become the company's longtime president and COO. Then in April last year, SpaceX hired NASA human spaceflight chief Kathy Lueders to manage the general ops of the company's Starbase facility in South Texas, where Starship's operational systems are being developed. In this role, she reports directly to Gwynne Shotwell. Additionally, SpaceX's CEO, Mark Juncosa, an engineer who successfully led Starlink after Elon fired several CEOs back in 2018, took over leadership of the Starship program in the summer of 2022. For this reason, targeting Elon through SpaceX is a misguided strategy because in reality, they're attacking other people like Kathy Lueders, Gwynne Shotwell, Mark Juncosa, and thousands of other workers. All of them are working day and night to serve the nation's best interest, including NASA's Artemis. The early test flights of Starship have played a crucial role in helping the development of the rocket and become reliably operational as soon as possible, allowing SpaceX and NASA to test more technologies like in-space refueling, which is essential for Artemis getting on the moon. In the distant future, when giant rockets can take all humans to the moon, the U.S. is going to have greater opportunities to beat out China in this space race. China wants to land their astronauts in the moon by the end of this decade, and NASA admin Bill Nelson wants to get U.S. astronauts back on there before then. However, with Artemis's delays due to hardware readiness and admin procedures, it's going to be difficult to make all that happen. We definitely want to see America win again this century, but we don't want any accidents caused by a go fever approach. Of course, SpaceX has accelerated itself to meet that goal, and the FAA and the government, they need to appreciate the company's efforts and aspirations. Right on. That's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for watching.